All right, Charlotte Malterre-Barthes, it's nice to have you here. Thank you for taking the time to sit down with us and discuss your work and your history um, for the Biennale audience, as well as for a kind of archival project with the Architecture Lobby. Um, so to begin with, I'd just like to ask you to introduce yourself, tell a little bit about who you are, what you do, and maybe just give us some key moments in your journey as an architectural worker and organizer, a bit of a window into your own origin story.
Mhm. Yes, thank you. So, yes, I'm Charlotte Malterre-Barthes. I'm currently assistant professor at EPFL. I lead there the laboratory RIOT. I can say that a lot of the maybe experience that I gathered around being an architectural worker are related to the fact that I practiced extensively during almost 10 years before I circled back to academia. And I would maybe refer to a time where conversations on working conditions in architecture offices were completely absent. And nevertheless, having a kind of hunch that things were not okay. And for instance, I can say that there was a moment during that time where I was practicing that me and a few other people, we got together and let's say started kind of a political group where we were seeking to find spaces where we would address the political or the lack of political conversation in architecture and the lack of awareness of the role that the profession plays in various profit generating systems. So either within the office, but also, of course, what kind of work do you produce, and the kind of position of the profession as designing the built environment for others that are not necessarily represented in the office and things like that. So it's also perhaps useful to also reflect on the fact that I had quite a conservative architectural education. I graduated from the School of Architecture in Marseille, which is like a French institution under the shadow of Corbusier, of course, because it's home to l'unité, and also to something that I think when I talk about this with my colleague now, they say that they don't remember that, but a sort of maybe Stockholm syndrome of sorts, where you would not really fully understand that doing all-nighters and things like that is maybe not okay, or that professors would kind of disparage your work at every possible occasion. I mean, you knew you would go into studio reviews by knowing that you will be destroyed. So, this would just be kind of default, and there was no real discussion on whether that was okay or not. And I think that in a way, this kind of mindset also percolates into the kind of work condition that you accept as an architectural worker. So these things are kind of connected, I would say. And I would say the sort of awareness that emerges after that. So I practice in France, I practice in India, I practice in Switzerland. And to me, it was also interesting how shockingly similar the conditions were. So maybe the salary varies a little bit, but there is a complete lack of, solidarity among workers. There's a lot of competition. And let's say that if there is not competition, there is also something very interesting that I find we don't really talk about so much, is the fact that this kind of maybe design solidarity that you can find into an office is also part of making sure that you will stay even though the conditions are unacceptable. So I know from facts that big offices actually design their teams in a way that they would guarantee, especially big offices, they would guarantee that there is a a variety of nationalities within the kind of, for instance, interns teams that they put together, because they know that when one of that worker will face a kind of, you know, all-nighter situation, because usually those are working on competition, they would draw on the solidarity of their fellow nationals or workers to kind of help them work on that for free, of course, because that would be a favor that they do to that worker. And somehow this is also something that is designed. So when you think, oh, I have a horrible job, but I'm staying because the people there are wonderful, well, this too is somehow part of that kind of culture, right? So I think that at a certain point in my time in practice, I mean, apart from being a kind of vocal feminist, I've always kind of felt a little uncomfortable with a lot of the aspects that the office kind of presents, and tried to somehow address that. So by also calling for a union very early onwards, let's say almost like around 2011, 2012, realizing that there was that, for instance, what is referred to as like architects union, so syndicat des architectes, as you would call it in France, are actually structures that are at the service of office owners, right? And not the kind of the cat monkey, as we used to call it at the time. So the kind of really the worker, which is not even owning its means of production in that case, and really kind of I mean, even that has changed. But anyway, so I would say that through gathering this kind of expertise of sorts of working in an office, I would gain a kind of consciousness of that, maybe also a kind of class and gender consciousness. I mean, I think these things are very closely connected in architecture. So the fact that the office is usually at the hands of white men, and there is a class component, so the kind of also wealth, maybe background that comes with it, I think are also kind of important to have a full picture of the profession, I would say. Yes, and then I think I can kind of weave that further and talk a little bit about how that somehow also percolates into some of the work that I do today, and also how I see the problems that are faced by architectural workers today. In a way, it's also connected to the architecture school. So of course, you know, I'm not an architecture historian, so I don't need to kind of lay out the whole story of the profession as a kind of Beaux-Arts model, where you have a master that teaches the others who just kind of repeat what the work has been done. But I do believe that the educational system basically prepares what I refer to as like cannon fodder for the office. So you will be broken in first and second year. You will learn that if you're not ready to do like all-nighters and spend a lot of time on assignments, you'll probably not, you probably don't have what it takes to be an architect. So there's a kind of almost like preparatory moments. And I think that this is basically also at times perpetrated by colleagues who, you know, repeat what they've been, what the way they've been educated. I mean, in my case, I had to deconstruct a lot of the ways that I was educated to kind of think of how I was educating. I think for instance, my pedagogies have changed since in the past 10 years when I started teaching. And today, for instance, I have a kind of really path of learning and unlearning to do. And I think that a lot of my colleagues don't really do that, or have not really, you know, kind of done that work, I would say. So in that sense, there is also a kind of there's a preparation that happens with the pedagogy, and then there is of course a kind of lack of awareness of labor rights. What can you demand, what are your benefits and all of that. And this is interesting to look at if you do something that we did a couple of years ago in our studio, which was a kind of global panorama of the architectural practice. So we took like 24 countries. We looked at India, we looked at Switzerland, France, Albania, Portugal, and then saw that the places where architecture workers had decent rights were connected to larger working struggles. So if you consider to be if you consider to be a worker and you're benefiting from previous struggles and benefits that have been like hard fought for by larger workers classes, like it's the case, I think, in the Netherlands and in Denmark. So everybody has the same kind of working condition. As soon as you're employed, it doesn't matter where, you will have the same rights. Then you're fine. If you're in another condition, you're just a kind of very disempowered, disenfranchised worker, like in Italy, where a lot of people work, or in Belgium, I think you work on like this kind of fake employment, fake freelancing. So you will be asked to register as a freelancer. You will have no benefits. You have to pay everything yourself. Typically, you even would have to bring your own production tools, so your own laptop to work. The office doesn't take care of anything, and the salary is very meager. And that is where, of course, there is a division that happens where you think that it's already, maybe if you're, for instance, a migrant worker and you're, say, a French architect working in Switzerland, or a Greek architect working in Germany, then you will hear that it's better than at home, right? So there is also kind of like an attempt to create these kind of expectations of gratitude in the workplace, which would keep you from demanding whatever is right. So I think that, for instance, this is one of the of a central point of potential intervention, I would say, where there is a need to interrogate these systems. So maybe I can also mention that within the work that we do at RIOT, for instance, we did a studio last year that was called Fix the Office, which with which we basically looked at this global practice. Then we looked at the legal frameworks, how is architecture work considered and valued in which context? And it's very interesting to see that the narratives differ very much from the truth. So we hear that the profession is always on the brink of extinction. It's such a serious situation everywhere. And then when you look at the numbers tell you that we've never done as well as today in terms of like work. There is work for architects. But then the question is like, where do you locate then this reality? Of course, there is work, who has work, and who benefits from the work, of course. So the kind of this kind of landscape was really useful. And then we kind of thought about what are the systems that exist not to be an office, for instance, or like to be an office, but not that kind of office. And there, I mean, it was really super interesting to look at existing offices that practice differently, for instance. And here, of course, you look at collectives, you look at offices that have very strong kind of democratic practices within the office, where they decide for instance, the structure is owned by employees, where they collegially decide what kind of project do they undertake, and things like that. So actually, there is a lot of, I would say, models, in fact. Some of them have to be sought outside of architecture, of course. If you look at rotating associations, saving and association systems where people pool resources, for instance, together and then use that money. This is an example of an office that we investigated, whether you would somehow pool the income and then redistribute it, so that if you do some really, bread job, you can still practice in a way that you would want to practice and still have like basic benefits and things like that. So we looked at that and found really, promising and exciting other ways of being an office. That were very inspiring to think about answering some of these problems that architecture workers face.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, this is really great and interesting to hear you walk through kind of an international survey through your own experience and your more recent research that takes a kind of comparative approach. I really loved that you use the term solidarity, but actually in a negative sense, design solidarity to convey the kind of social engineering that happens within traditional institutions that govern our profession of architecture, whether it's the hierarchy of a professional office or a school, and how the kind of template of a hierarchical system gets then transposed to another context. It was really interesting to hear that. And, of course, we say that solidarity is the answer, worker solidarity, but to hear that used kind of in the inverse is an interesting proposition there. Um, so, um, yeah, thanks so much for that answer. Um, I guess to kind of take your observations and kind of activate them toward the future, I could ask you what advice you have for people kind of basically looking to be more involved with these topics more specifically, either organizing around them or simply kind of joining operative or a an alternative group that you've just identified as, a kind of possible answer to the to some of the problems that you've identified. Um, so I'll ask that question, but also invite you to talk more specifically about some of the key problems that you engage with um, that face architectural workers, but that also are sort of unique to our time period of now in terms of obviously the kind of political crises and the rise of fascism, and also climate change and the carbon crisis of our era. And maybe if you see a way to connect those two together, I'd be interested to hear your response to that.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, one of the things that I find interesting and really promising is the kind of unsexy labor of policymaking and entering these rooms into which we don't really go, which are the ones where we write norms and we write specs and things like that, as a way to also understand the systems within which we operate, right? So I think there is a question for me. There is something that's really key and that I really dedicate a lot of my work to, which is the literacy of systems. So understanding within which system we operate, and we are part of the systems fully, of course, at many levels, but we don't really understand them fully. So I think one of the tools that I seek to give through pedagogies, for instance, is the tool of literacy. So the readings of power dynamics, understanding actors within the profession, knowing the rights, knowing where the rights come from, knowing who has fought for which rights. A kind of, I would say a kind of literacy, of a systemic literacy, which I think allows you also to decide where you would want to act if you wanted to change something. So in a way, also to kind of pick your battles, like where do you want to act? Do you think that if you are within this industry, you just wish to change it for the better to address, for instance, the climate crisis? So how do you do that? So those rooms of policy making, for instance, are one of these points of interventions, but that could also be somewhere else. It could also be engaging with the construction site, for instance, and thinking about class questions and how, for instance, we're distant, right, from the people that execute the designs we produce, how little we think about the maintenance of the spaces we design. So a kind of cross architectural class awareness, I guess. I think that would be one of the desired way to answer some of the questions you've asked. You know, like if you want to be a less extractive, I guess, profession. And for me, when I say less extractive, I mean not just carbon, but also labor and potentially also cultural and kind of multiple forms of extraction that that are part of our discipline. Those are all connected, right? So if you decide, you as an architectural worker that is, you know, in an office, you have agency in deciding, I don't know, which kind of door handles you're going to use, for instance. Well, those door handles have an externalized footprint that you don't really think about when you design, for instance. So there's the kind of responsibility towards materials, but then there is also the question of, like, you know, who is going to kind of use that door handle, or just kind of like the way that things are being part of like larger system, as something that I find really important to engage with. So I find like multiple entry points are useful. I think that if you have the literacy of the system, then people are able to kind of make decisions about where they would want to act. Is it at pedagogy level? Is it at is it the design of your own practice? Is it if you're in a practice, the choices of material, the choices of project? Can you influence the project that the office is actually taking on, depending on which office you find yourself laboring for? Or do you fight for, you know, a kind of more responsible yeah, construction site practice? So the kind of, I feel like there are multiple entry points if you want to engage. I think one of the questions is like getting that awareness. And for that, I think there is no better, there's no better tool than to engage in collective kind of forms of engagement. So how do you find like-minded people, right? So the kind of, I think the internet has really, you know, picked up and helped people to really organize also and find each other. I'm thinking about the group called Non-Swiss Architects, which has focused on foreign architecture workers in Switzerland, for instance, conduct a survey, gathering data, proving that at the bottom of the food chain of the architecture office, there will be a female foreign intern who will basically do all the labor that the office cannot really afford to do, right? So, and then of course it percolates back up, and then it asks the question, if your office is operating on exploitative labor, should it exist at all? Which is a question that hurts, but also goes back to the kind of canonized culture of architecture that we perpetuate in institutions. You know, it's like the office with your name on it, and the kind of authorized, like the complete absence of a plural authorship, of course, responsibility and all of that. So I think, to me, all these questions are very connected, right? So it's a culture that perpetuates a kind of exploitative system that prevents. Also, there is something that I think Doug Spencer and Marina D'Aprile called the intellectual veneer of the profession. We don't see ourselves as workers. We are intellectual, you know, kind of bodies that envision spaces for people. But we have the vision that people can just use the space, right? So I would say that for me, it's an all-rounded question. I do not really differentiate. And I think that if you really engage with the critique of architecture as a profession, but also as a discipline, as a pedagogy, as a practice, those things are so entangled. They kind of nourish each other, the narratives of success, the kind of expectations of construction, and the role of the profession in this kind of profit-driven um, economies, right? So I think when you were referring to the political crisis, you can also see that the people that are currently in power all have something to do with land and real estate, which I think is also speaking volumes for how we participate in these systems.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks so much for that. I really like how you kind of foreshadowed the final question about your vision for the future of architecture already, talking about um, cultural problems, cultural awareness, and kind of systems awareness as being the beginning of an awakening that enables architectural workers to see beyond themselves and beyond the kind of idols and role models that they're presented with within traditional institutions. So yeah, I thought that was a very kind of concise, interrelated answer about the vision of the future having to do with like an awareness of complicity, an awareness of systems of participation. So with that, is there anything else that you'd like to add for kind of vision of the future? But I think you really already addressed that really well. So no need.
No, I think it's all yeah, I think it's all there. It's all connected, I guess.